In this video, we're going to talk about Anaheim, the Anaheim corruption probe, kind of some updates on the whole situation going on in Anaheim regarding that, what it might mean for Disneyland Forward. We might even dive into Reedy Creek a little bit. We have a lot to break down today. Up next.
Welcome to Orange Grove 55.
Welcome aboard to another episode of OG 55, where today we're going to talk about the Anaheim corruption probe and how things have changed a little bit in regards to the politics regarding that in the city of Anaheim. A little different than maybe what we thought would happen initially. Very interesting stuff happening there. But before we dive in, I want to introduce my fantastic, producer Dre, Dr. Dre, host of Freshly Squeezed, Vast Guy, the man who carries many, many titles. Dre, welcome back to the show, brother. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, I really do. The introductions, I am honored, humbly honored. Honored to be here, talk about this kind of stuff. I mean, this is a very interesting series of events here, not just on this coast, but on the other. I think it's going to be a great show. But if you want to see me, well, it's going to be on the channel you're watching right now, at Orange Grove 55 at Freshly Squeezed, your source for juicy news and info squeezed fresh right from the Grove. And if you want to interact with me, you can go ahead and do so right down there at Vash Sky. Type in the Twitter, and it should pop up. Haven't played this drop in a while, so let's go ahead and give it a whirl.
But really, nothing compares with a freshly squeezed.
Nothing compares.
Nothing compares. Love Adam the Woo. Shout out to Adam the Woo.
Absolutely.
Love that 100%. Guy. So let's dive into the topic at hand today. It's been a little while, Dre, since we talked about this Anaheim corruption probe and like the effects on Disneyland Forward and what have you. And the last time we kind of dove into it, we were both kind of in agreement that like Anaheim was going to overreact. Because you know, they were going to overreact to this. There was going to be all kinds of stuff going on and passed in the legislature and what have you. And it's going to be a total mess and really kind of put a big kind of roadblock for Disneyland Forward. Now, that still might be the case. You know, we're still not all the way through it. Disneyland Forward hasn't been approved yet. But there's been some things that come to light that maybe point in another direction.
Maybe. You know, it both kind of point in that direction, or maybe, you know, suggest the opposite, interestingly enough. We'll go over why we think that is. It's a very kind of interesting thing, though. As you pointed out, you know, once that FBI report was published, and while there were certain names that were redacted, it was very clear that the FBI, or at least that specific agent, had considered Disneyland to be part of this cabal secretly running the Anaheim area. And to be fair, not exactly that far off, you know, and I'll think. But look, it is very fascinating. You know, and a lot of this stems from, you know, what happened regarding the Eastern Gateway project and the AAA new luxury hotel complex that they were actually going to build. I mean, you saw right there how those two projects really got, you know, destroyed from, you know, political interference and you know, people maybe with not the, you know, best outlook when it came to, you know, Disney and how it operated. They you know, what's the expression? You know, to channel my inner George, they really wanted to go ahead and let's see. There you go. They really wanted to go ahead and piss in their cornflakes. Let's just put it that way.
Exactly, right?
And look, I know, and this, I think this is why Disney really upped their involvement. It's kind of a fascinating thing, but, you know, and we've seen the city kind of attempt to counter, right, from this FBI report. We saw maybe some campaign finance bills attempt to be passed through the legislature. We saw a 2% gate tax attempt to be passed the legislature. And oh, gee, what exactly happened to those?
Well, very interesting development with those, because really, like I mentioned, like early on in the show, look, when this whole like FBI probe looking into Harry Sadu's dealings with like the Angels Stadium and what have you, it made front page news all over the place, and I really thought, and so did you, we both really thought that Anaheim was going to overreach, because they wanted to kind of have this optics of like, oh, we're on it. We're not going to let this happen again. Well, it's kind of funny, because the one major thing that could have prevented a lot of stuff going forward with this stuff would have been a campaign finance reform for the city of Anaheim. And that was recently actually shot down. It says here that, let me get to the actually part here. 1 second here. It says here, at the center of the uproar is what the FBI describes as a cadre of powerful individuals who influenced City Hall in the written affidavit released as part of the Federal Bureau's probe. Residents and a few critical local officials say the problem partly starts with big corporate money in local elections, where corporate-controlled political action committees, or PACs, spend on big select candidates. But without enough city council support, all recent attempts at reform have failed. Most recently at Tuesday's council meeting, where residents say they got their clearest signal yet that the interests under the FBI's microscope are now clinging, quote, with all their might to remain in power. So this is the thing. It's like, okay, I thought really that something like this would have went through, because I thought Anaheim and the city council would have wanted to sort of make good, right? Sort of say, hey, look, we know there's like this big cabal. We know it's like all this kind of like impropriety, or even the appearance of impropriety and all that stuff. And we're going to pass campaign finance and sort of give Anaheim some peace of mind that we're working on it. They didn't do that. And they didn't do that. And that says a lot. And what it says to me personally is that maybe Disneyland Forward isn't as dead as we thought it might have been after this probe, because obviously the city council doesn't really care too much about optics right now. Because if they really were overly obsessed with the optics, this would have passed. This would have been the first thing to pass if they cared that much.
Yeah, I mean, when you really think about it, campaign finance reform and the 2% gate tax or whatever, those are, I mean, it makes Disneyland Forward look like some street enhancement project. I mean, honestly, these are much bigger, and you would have thought that had this council pivoted, it would have pivoted towards this direction, right out of the gate, to your point. And they did not. It's interesting, when it comes to the let's start with the 2% gate tax there. I guess these proposals are forwarded by, I believe, the gentleman's name is
Jose Moreno.
Jose Moreno. Yeah, I didn't want to screw up the name again, so I do appreciate that, OJ. This city councilman who has been very, maybe adverse to Disney and adverse to the control that they have, and some articles attempt to, shed him in this kind of this light. Oh, he's fighting for the people of Anaheim and so forth. I'm not quite sure I would agree with that assessment, but. With the 2% gate tax, I mean, we had talked on the phone, and I believe we mentioned it several shows, that it's kind of an untenable, infeasible thing, especially with his provision that, oh, well, maybe Anaheim residents don't actually pay for it. It's like, well, I don't know how you ensure that. I don't know how you regulate or account for that, but. It was something where it was like, look, the bed tax alone from hotels in the area. I mean, it's right. You're talking millions and millions and millions of dollars, and you can much better ensure that Anaheim residents don't actually pay for that, than something like a 2% gate tax. Just walking into the park. So. That was a little suspect. I was very surprised, though, that did die as well. And you have this kind of campaign finance reform, which, I mean, they, in one of the articles, they cite that apparently through kind of Disney's pack of choice soar. Apparently, they've funneled like $2.1 million into that pack since 2016. And when you got to think, why is 2016 relevant? Well, think about it. The Eastern Gateway project gets completely, shut down in October of 2017. And then just a year later, in October 2018, we see that hotel complex get sliced as well. So, I could kind of understand Disney's position where it's like, well, maybe we shouldn't have necessarily politicians, honestly affecting the future of the resort in this way. These were huge expansions, millions of dollars in development and resources applied to them. We saw in Downtown Disney's case, the destruction of basically that whole side of Downtown Disney ultimately. They shut down the AMC Theater, the ESPN Zone, Rainforest Cafe, all those proprietors gone, all those jobs lost. Carousel Inn, they destroy that in preparation for Eastern Gateway, and now that's on the vine. You're going to have to pay taxes on that land until you get some politicians in place to be on your side, so to speak. And so I can understand Disney's position. We're going to take a more active role when it comes to the politics of Anaheim, because look at how the future of the entire resort has been affected. Now, some might call that, pay for play, corruption, all that kind of stuff, a cabal, right? That assessment can be argued for sure. I'm not here to apologize on Disney's behalf by any stretch. At the same time, however, you can see how big developments and big improvements to the actual resort itself get heavily impacted by a couple of politicians sitting on that city council. It's a drastic thing, and there will be consequences either which way. But go ahead, OG. I do apologize.
No, you're absolutely right. It's interesting, and we talked yesterday on the phone, and I thought you mentioned a great point about the Jose Moreno thing, where you mentioned, why would he kind of introduce legislation to the council that he kind of knew would get shot down. And I thought you made a great point with that, because we constantly hear how he's, like you said, for the people. But why would you introduce something that you knew wasn't going to pass, right? It just seems a little, like you said, a little suspect.
Yeah. It's a little suspect. A lot of these positions are a little suspect because, are you trying to call out your political opponents? Are you really looking for change, or are you trying to, do something else? It is a little like, that's interesting. Now, hey, the city council looks like to be still fully in the pocket of Disney, and no joke. That's a little bit of a strong sentiment, but. Look, they do seem to remain Disney friendly, as we were alluding to at the top of the show. And hey, maybe that does actually point to Disneyland Forward, maybe potentially not being as dead as we thought. To reiterate the point, if Disneyland Forward was truly dead, these things would have come before it. These campaign finance reforms bills, this 2% tax and so forth. These city council proposals, which you would have thought would have passed, really haven't. Now there has been movement in that direction. I think a couple of the articles point out how maybe the votes have changed a little bit, but not as much as you would think. Right. And that's very key here. The only thing else... Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, the overcorrection has been a lot less of an overcorrection than I expected. I really did expect, when this whole probe was all over the news, I'm like, oh, here we go. Anaheim's going to overcompensate, and we're not going to get anything freaking through. This is going to be like pulling teeth, and I'm really surprised. I got to say it again. I'm really surprised at the lack of kind of this overdone response, because California loves overdone responses. They absolutely love overdone responses. Yeah. I'm not going to get into too much of that, but you at home, you probably know. You probably hear it all on the news all the time. And so I was really surprised by the amount of restraint that Anaheim had when it came to the campaign finance and the gate tax. It's like, what's going on here? Like, this is weird. And the only thing I could think of, Dre, and it points to what you said, that maybe Disneyland still has a little more control than we think still. Like, they're still kind of, I don't want to say calling the shots, because they still do fight with the city quite a bit, and they have for a long time. But maybe it's not as maybe this anti-Disney push isn't as fervent as we thought. With this probe and everything, maybe it is a little bit tempered. Maybe cooler heads are sort of prevailing a little bit, and that bodes well. Like I said, it bodes well for Disneyland Forward. I'm not as bullish on Disneyland Forward as I was like a few months ago, like before the corruption probe. But I'm more bullish on Disneyland Forward getting approved than I was a month or so ago when the corruption probe first came to light. If that makes sense. I'm kind of somewhere in between those two things right now.
Yes, I would very much I would agree with you. Had these proposals gone through, our sentiments would have basically stayed the same, or maybe even gotten worse. That Disneyland Forward is truly dead, and here we go. But with these two proposals that you would have thought would have been surefire hits for a city council attempting to, I don't know, assuage a public concern or at least, temper down the room there when it comes to the allegations of corruption. You would have thought that this would have gone through, and they didn't. Now, I will say, the campaign finance thing, it's interesting. One of the layers or individual pieces proposed legislation as attached to that was, that city council members would recuse themselves had they been, donated to from that entity for the last 12 months or whatever. I must confess that it's a little bit of an untenable position, because you would think that, just Disney alone would have their hands in just basically every single project, much less, everybody else. I don't really know how you're supposed to distill that. Again, enforcement power was an issue, and rightfully so. I mean, are you going to enforce this against every single city councilman who doesn't, necessarily, backtrack every single, proprietor or investment or donator, that is donated to their campaign? A lot of these projects have multiple hands and so forth. I don't know. I didn't think that was most tenable either. There were ways to go about it, I suppose, but, look, from Disney's position, I just, relayed two huge projects that were outright canceled because the local politics in the area wasn't favorable to them. I can understand Disney's position, and hey, look, maybe people don't personally agree, and I get it, right? But I can understand Disney's position, wanting to take more of a to take more of an ownership stake into how these things will actually go going forward, and that's just kind of the reality of the situation. People talk about how, businesses, corporations, and so forth shouldn't be involved in politics. And look, I am happy to hear those arguments, but at the same time, if you don't, likely you'll be railroaded by other entities that might have a stake as well.
Yeah, and I think the whole, I know, a lot of the news outlets ran with, this whole cabal thing, and Disneyland basically runs Anaheim. And look, to a large degree, that might be true. But at the same time, it's not entirely true, because as a Disneyland fan, and I've been so my entire life, and I've been following this stuff very closely, Disney has fought the city constantly, and not just recently, for decades. Yes. Westcott. The Michael Eisner era, late 90s, they were fighting the city about Westcott. We recently had the whole thing with the Fourth Hotel, the Eastern Gateway project. Look, for a company that runs Anaheim, they sure do have a lot of issues with the city of Anaheim. True. So it's technically they probably have a lot of clout, and to be fair, they probably should. Anaheim wouldn't really be anything without Disneyland Resort. It would be some other city in California that no one would really care about, to be honest. But at the same time, I think that there's this perception that like Disney runs the city and they just get whatever they want. And really, that's not the case. Following stuff for years, I can see that they definitely do not. If they did, we would a lot of things would have happened that did not happen. A lot of the local businesses on Harbor Boulevard managed to sway the city council and the city of Anaheim against the Eastern Gateway project and that parking structure and the bridge and everything. And again, if there was like this big cabal and Disney ran the city, well, that would have went through. So yeah, I think that there's a little bit of like an exaggerated notion of the cabal with Disney, but at the same time, it's not exactly like they have no influence. I think there is definitely influence there. Maybe not as much as people think there is, but definitely there. So it's an interesting dynamic over there. And yeah, I agree with you. I can see why Disney, after getting knocked down with the hotel and this, that, and the other, why they would kind of get a little more aggressive. Because, look, the future of the resort. If they don't push back, they're not going to be able to do much. They're very limited on space. So
yeah, well, yeah, and in the case of that, directly to speak to your point, add a little bit more meat on those bones. You look at the Eastern Gateway project, correct? And look, I always thought Disney's position was a little bit like, come on, like let's, we can build this thing while including the businesses around you. What are you doing? I never understood where. To give our viewers some perspective on this, with the Eastern Gateway project was going to also come with it an expansion of the Disney security bubble. If any of you, park goers have noticed, Disney has been broadening that a little bit, every step of the way to a point now where basically it starts at essentially the harbor entrance and extends all the way to the far end of downtown Disney. That wasn't always the case, but with the Eastern Gateway project, it was going to broaden out even more and include this kind of new parking structure all the way over across harbor, bypassing those businesses. So, if for all that foot traffic that is benefited by the resort's area or location. Essentially, for all that foot traffic coming down harbor, coming north on harbor, you'd have to have all of those people kind of bypass that in order to get within the security bubble. Probably should have had an illustration to show this, but well, it was those businesses who felt they were like, whoa, hey, wait a minute, we're gonna have the foot traffic that we've enjoyed for 20 plus years or whatever might not be a thing anymore. So, because of this, and they kind of rallied together and canceled out the Eastern Gateway project in order to preserve that foot traffic that they so enjoy. Well, I mean, at that point, Disney did not have the seat at the table that I think they were expecting, and they unfortunately got railroaded by other stakeholders in the city. So I think this idea that Disney not get involved in the kind of local Anaheim politics, I think is it's unrealistic. I think they've now understood that they have to get involved at some level. Maybe they're going too far, I'm not sure, and the FBI certainly alleges it and all that kind of stuff. But I think the most realistic position for Disney going forward with Anaheim is to be involved on some level, and that's just kind of how that's going to be how it is. And to your point, Ochi, I mean, they are the economic driver for the entire area. Shouldn't they get a say as well? I think they should. How much? That is up for debate.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I was a big proponent. Like I was very vocal when that whole Eastern Gateway thing was going down. I was very vocal that like Disney doesn't really owe the local businesses anything. Right? Like it's not Disney's responsibility to make sure the McDonald's and the IHOP have a robust, there you go, I'm using the word robust business, right? Like, it's not really Disney's concern. But at the same time, once it did become a thing and the city council or the city and the businesses pushed back, I thought it was foolish on Disney's part to kind of completely drop the project. Like, just build the structure, get the Eastern Gateway set, figure a way to do it that you can have that foot traffic for those businesses. If that's the only sticking point to getting it done, get it done, figure it out. Because you know what? That whole Eastern Gateway project on the harbor, that's the reason why Avengers Campus moved over to the spot that was formerly Bugs Land. We would have got a much bigger, more fleshed out Avengers Campus if we would have gotten that if we would have gotten that Eastern Gateway.
Yes.
Right. So it's like, I don't understand like that. It just felt like, even though I agree with Disney and I'm kind of on their side when it comes to the local businesses, I think the businesses are sort of coming off a little bit entitled, like, hey, you owe us for some reason. I don't know why, but all that aside, at the end of the day, okay, it didn't work out. So just figure it out then otherwise. Give the local businesses that traffic and get your Eastern Gateway and get it done. It's better for the resort to work a deal. You don't want to get, maybe you don't get everything that you wanted initially, but at least you're getting something, and at least you can kind of expand DCA and it's positive. And I'm really surprised they just said, you know what, Disney just said, you know what, we're not going to do it at all. I'm like, well, that doesn't really help the resort, though. That doesn't help DCA at all. Like, I get it. Like, you know, you want your bridge, you want this, that, and the other. But it's like, I was really disappointed that they gave up on it completely. Come on. You have the smartest minds, the smartest creative minds at the Walt Disney Company and Imagineering. You couldn't come up with a solution for the Gateway project where the local businesses and Disney benefit? It's like, it's crazy. And this is coming from someone who didn't even support the local businesses. I still think they're being ridiculous in demanding the access to the foot traffic. But at the end of the day, it didn't work out, Disney. So work something out with them and get it done.
Yeah, I mean that's you know, the best example that you can point to, and you laid it out perfectly, OG, of politics on both sides really affecting the guest experience in the end. In the end, we didn't get the Marvel Land as promised, and we might get it eventually. I'm not saying that we won't. We likely will get some form of the Eastern Gateway project, but for the here and now, we didn't get the Marvel Land as promised because the politics of the situation, because they couldn't come to some. And I will say, I agree with you, OG. I mean, at a certain point, Disney was, I mean, they were overly stubborn in that instance.
Yeah.
They should have worked out a solution there. And again, it was that one kind of strip of harbor that was at issue. You're talking millions and millions of dollars in development. Parking that would have helped everybody and all that kind of stuff, but all that goes out the window because some security bubble issue. It's absolutely ridiculous to be quite honest. But it's interesting. It's not the only Disney entity having trouble with its local politics, right? We just got an update here on the Reedy Creek Improvement District and how that right there is an issue that's developing, and we may have had an indicator here pointing to what is actually going to happen.
Right, yeah. There was a article. I don't have it with me right now. Let me actually pull this article up. Give me 1 second, y'all. There was an article that came out the other day. It was from Bloomberg about Reedy Creek. And I'm going to share my screen. And we're going to dive into this. Because this is interesting stuff here. It says Florida's bond chief sees Disney district being reestablished. And I'm not gonna just read the whole article for you guys, but I'm gonna read a little bit, set the table, and then we'll talk about it. But it says here, Florida's head of bond finance said lawmakers will likely reestablish the embattled Walt Disney Company's special district after the state passed a law that would dissolve the governing body next year. Ben Watkins, director of the state's division of bond finance, said legislatures are likely to create a successor district, one that would assume many of the powers that Reedy Creek Improvement District, the agency that allows Disney to perform certain municipal functions at its resort properties, like emergency services, garbage collection, and infrastructure funding, currently has. The new district won't have some of the powers granted that were never used, such as operating a nuclear power plant. So this is fascinating, Dre. This is fascinating. And this is kind of like, you called it, my man. You called it. We did many videos on Reedy Creek, and you said this is pretty much what's going to happen. They're going to go ahead and reestablish some version of Reedy Creek, but it's going to be limited, a little bit more limited. They're going to, take out the power plant stuff and things like that. So fascinating stuff. And you hit the nail on the head, brother.
Yeah, and that, I do appreciate that, OG. Hey, look, if you've been watching the show, hey, maybe you know what's going to happen. Very interesting. Hit that subscribe button to stay informed on not just what has happened, but what might. And with the Reedy Creek Improvement District, I think it was a, what the future might be for it. I think it was just using deductive reasoning. They have a huge assortment of different assets and infrastructural, items that really, to parse them out efficiently, really, the only way to handle them, the only way to deal with them was really only ever going to be in the form of a new special district, to be honest. I don't think the cities or counties or the state was looking to take over those plants and so forth. What is it? A lot of the responsibilities that the RCID handles right now. I don't think they were much interested in that. I think the issue for them was more on the tax side than anything else. And again, that could also be, handled by a special district. And the second indicator that maybe they were going in this direction was, I believe it was Governor DeSantis himself that said that the state was going to take control of the RCID. Well, the only real feasible way for that to actually happen is by a special district not formed by a county or a city, but by the state itself, which was the genesis of the RCID in the first place. This was a very unique special district in that the legislature themselves actually set it up specifically for Disney. Reasoning would suggest that they could do it again. And I think that, that's why I was holding them to that position, because that was probably the most likely instance, and it looks like that is going to be the case. Now, obviously, they cite the reasons as bonds and some of the other issues as to why they're going to do this. I'm not so sure on that. Bonds was the bond issue was a particular note. There's no question, but I think there was a variety of other factors in place to kind of suggest that this was what they were going to do, and honestly, it kind of necessitated it. They have their own power plant, they have their own water treatment facility, they have their own pieces of infrastructure that really, it's just it best stay with the RCID. They've been maintaining it so far, and go from there. Now, on the issue of like a nuclear power plant, for instance, I'll say this: this was absolutely a thing. Okay, it's. I believe it's in the. the original Reedy Creek Improvement Act that autonomous power generation, right? Be up to not limited by limited to a nuclear power plant. I believe it actually references it specifically, and I believe I played a piece of audio on a previous show showing that was always part of the plan for Progress City. Even when the Carousel of Progress was actually installed in Disneyland, you actually hear audio of them talking about a nuclear power plant being part of the Progress City project, and that was going to be a holdover from there and go forward. That's why the nuclear power plant thing was actually in there. And for those saying that, maybe it was unimportant to Disney fought tooth and nail in the 1990s and early 2000s when these things were up for debate, that provision of the Reedy Creek Improvement Act actually be maintained, because there were legislatures before that were looking to reassess, the Reedy Creek Improvement District, maybe, take out certain provisions and so forth, and Disney lobbyists and everybody else fought, like I said, tooth and nail to keep that specific section in. Now, maybe it was motivated by, well, once you start taking out one, you can take out others. But that was very important to Disney. It was, No question of that. So this whole idea that, it wasn't a thing, this was a small deal. It was a big deal. It was a big deal at Disney, enough for them to put that out there. Well, yeah, I'll go ahead and stick with that. OG, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, it's a big deal. I think Disney just likes the ability, the kind of leeway to sort of manage themselves, and the provision is, it mentions a nuclear power plant, but it wasn't like limited to that, right? So like if Disney wanted to build some other form of energy, some other form of power plant, whatever, they could do that. And Disney, I think, enjoyed that sort of option, even though they never officially acted on that. I think Disney enjoyed the possibility of like, hey, worst came to worst, if we wanted to build this, that, or the other power plant, we can do that if we wanted to. Those days are likely over. I do think that, like, it even alluded to that in this article, that like if they do reestablish the district, that's one of the things that will probably die in the vine.
Yeah.
So, Disney will lose some power, almost certainly. But I think they'll still have the edge, maybe over competitors like Universal, who that don't have a special district at all. I still think Disney will still have some semblance of a special district, but it will be, I think some of these things will be surgically cut out, so to speak. And so it'll be very interesting. It'll be very, very interesting to see how that whole thing pans out. Now, Universal's not exactly struggling, though. Even with the disadvantage, Universal's like, I mean, they're gung ho, man. They're building Epic Universe. They're doing all kinds of stuff over there. So they're not exactly struggling, even though this stuff is happening. But it's still, I mean, there's no, you got to face the reality. I mean, it is an edge that Disney has over them, having these special privileges. I mean, even though Universal seems to be doing very well without them, yeah, I mean, Disney still has that advantage. And I think they'll continue that advantage. It'll just be a little bit less of an advantage than it was before,
Right. And I mean, to be to be fair, Universal does actually have a special district, but just established by its neighboring, I believe, county. I believe is the one who granted them their special district, and it's nowhere near what Disney has. So, so to your point, I believe that whatever special district is reestablished on Reedy Creek will likely be more in line with what Universal actually has, but with some special provisions that maintain some of its autonomy, right? Some of its utilities and so forth that they run and operate. So I don't, the whole thing about this RCAD when it was originally formed was that Disney pay basically next to nothing in taxes. They do still pay taxes, but not for utilities that they would otherwise manage themselves, right? And I believe that will be maintained, but for the utilities that they actually do operate and maintain, and not the ones that they necessarily don't. So at this point in time, the RCAD could have its own law enforcement if it wants to. It could set up its own courts and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, that's I don't think that's going to be necessary in the operation of a theme park. But one of the things it does have is its own fire department, and that has been at issue. Just recently, the head of the Reedy Creek Fire Department was actually seen with DeSantis endorsing him for 2024, and that tells you something right there for sure. Maybe the Reedy Creek Fire Department will be, maybe maintained, but maybe it won't be maintained actually by Disney.
That's fascinating.
That's a very interesting thing.
And I want to ask you one thing before we close it out today.
Sure.
Disney gets pushed into a lot of stuff. Sometimes, look, and maybe pushed into it isn't a good word, but sometimes things happen where Disney, a circumstance outside of their control happens, right? And they they have to move in another direction because of that circumstance. For example, Wizarding World was a phenomenon, a cultural phenomenon.
Sure.
Right? And it sort of pushed Disney into like the Galaxy's Edge and Pandora direction.
Correct.
It did, right?
Oh, yes.
So with this whole Reedy Creek thing, the whole purpose of Reedy Creek in the late 60s, 1967, I believe, was kind of premised on the idea that Disney was going to build this experimental prototype city of tomorrow, or community of tomorrow, that Walt originally envisioned for Epcot.
Correct.
Is there a scenario, and we're going pie in the sky crazy right now, I'm just throwing it out there to see what you think and see what our viewers think.
Go ahead.
Is there a scenario where, because Disney's desperate to keep their power, right? Yeah. They tell the state of Florida, hey, you know what? Actually, you know what? Yeah, we want to build the community of tomorrow now. We want to build the community of tomorrow now. Let us keep this thing because now we're interested. Now we want to do it.
Right.
Is there that possibility, because of the threat of losing the autonomy, that they might go, oh, well, actually, no, you know what? Actually, now, no, we want to do it now. We want to do it now. Is there a possibility, or am I just kind of verbal diarrhea?
You would think so, but under this era of management, I mean, that's why they separated themselves from Celebration, because once they did establish a city of any kind, now you might have voters that you have to answer to and who have a say in how Reedy Creek is actually run. See, that's the problem, is autonomous isn't necessarily autonomous. There is, if you have a segment, if you establish a population, well, now that population under the U.S. Constitution might actually have a say in how that locality is run. So it's one of those things. It's like, ooh, we don't want to necessarily get into that, and that's why they separated themselves from the city of Celebration, sold the land it sat on, and all of that. I mean, it's unlikely, honestly.
Unlikely.
I think the legislature knows this too. I think it's like, well, yeah, we got the channel the inner George. We got your balls in the vice, and you know it. So this is how what's gonna happen, and we're just gonna go ahead and crank that wheel. But interesting things I just wanted to go ahead and point out as far as the fire department goes. The Reedy Creek Fire Department, it's been a contentious issue lately. Look, my thing is it's not being necessarily maintained properly at the moment. They have to constantly call in help from surrounding counties and their fire departments. You're not necessarily autonomous when you're calling them for help all the time. Okay, so I think that gets slashed right there. And I think that's added in the form of taxes back to whatever form the Reedy Creek Improvement District actually takes. The other thing, too, the ability to pass its own ordinances or I should say, its building permits, it's, alcohol permits and so forth. That's probably going to go by the wayside as well, and that will be added in the form, in taxes. So Disney's position will not be nearly as strong as when it had the Reedy Creek Improvement District, in its full totality for the last 50 years. But it doesn't look like it's going to be the end of the world that, maybe people were afraid would happen.
100%. It won't be the end of the world. Like you said, they're going to lose a little bit of its edge. At the end of the day, Disney will survive. So with that said, I'll let Brie Larson close us out.
Thank you very much.
Nice.
And let's go ahead. Dre, if you can let everyone at home know where they can find you on social media, sir.
Best place to interact with me is going to be at Vashka. It's right down there. Just go ahead, type it into Twitter, should pop up, and give me a follow. Love to have you. Love the as Christine Wasteland McCarthy would say,
the robust
discussion. I think is very, very nice. So please keep those DMs and tweets coming. And if you want to see me, well, it's going to be on the channel you're watching right now at Orange Grove 55 at Freshly Squeezed, your source for juicy news and info squeezed fresh right from the Grove.
Perfect. Thank you, brother, for coming on. And thank you all for watching. Comment down below with your opinions on the whole thing, the Anaheim corruption probe, and kind of the city response lately to that probe. What do you think that means for Disneyland Forward? What are your thoughts on Reedy Creek and this whole kind of news about, it possibly being reestablished, but under certain certain rules that, you know, maybe cutting a little bit of kind of whittling down some of Disney's power. What do you think about that? We would love to hear from you. Thank you all so much for all your support. I just want to thank everybody again. We recently hit 4,000 subscribers, and we're all like super thankful. Every time you guys watch a video, like a video, share a video, comment on a video, it means the world to us. Thank you so much for all your support. And as always, have a wonderful day.